I'm going to start and introduce our speaker today, Tom Daems from the Leuven Institute of Criminology in Belgium. Tom is Professor of Criminology at the Leuven Institute, where he is also now Director. The institution, the Leuven Institute is the institution in which Tom has essentially grown up, the place where he was himself chiefly educated, but not exclusively. He has been allowed out once or twice to attend the LSE, to visit Edinburgh and some other institutions. It's a great pleasure to welcome Tom today. Tom is not only a prolific author of books, mostly, though not exclusively, about prisons, imprisonment. His first book, 208, on making sense of penal change, up until his recent work on comparative European prison studies, electronic monitoring, and indeed the subject of today's talk, which is intimate and other kinds of body searches. And if that were not enough, Tom is also now, for the last couple of years, the Belgian representative on the Committee on the Prevention of Torture. So he has both an academic and a kind of inspector's view of this topic, and we're really looking forward to hearing more about it. So without further ado, thank you very much, Tom. Tom's going to speak for about half an hour. Then we have half an hour's questions, and then that'll be that. So thanks very much. Okay, Tom, over to you.
Thank you, Richard. I'm going to try to share the PowerPoint or my screen. I think this functions.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Richard, for the introduction and for the invitation. Of course, for having me in this series. Also, Maximo, I'm very grateful for giving me this opportunity. I spoke about this topic actually in Santa Fe at some point. So some of the things that I will speak about might sound familiar to Maximo. It's also a topic that I've been working on for quite some time actually, and we also did a book on this topic. So I will also draw on this throughout my talk today. As Richard said, I'm an academic. I'm a criminologist, but I'm also a member of CPT since about 2 years. But I would like to stress that today I'm not talking on behalf of CPT. So I'm talking on behalf of my own. So this is my take on this topic, even though CPT will also appear in my presentation. Because as you may have learned from the title of the presentation and the brief introduction of the lecture, it's mostly about Europe and how Europe is struggling also with the topic of the body searches. That's the topic of my talk today. Now I have to see if I can, yeah, I think I found the button. Yeah. So this is the overview of my talk. So I will start with giving some examples, some very interesting cases, from the extraordinary to the mundane, from the exceptional to the normal, so to speak. And I will draw some conclusions from that. I will give you some observations on the basis of some of these cases. And then I will continue with thinking about body searches from this tension between dignity on the one hand and security on the other hand. Body searches as contested control measures, which have become the object of civilizing efforts, so to speak, from a European perspective, which is the main perspective that I'm adopting in this talk. So I will look at some European efforts in how to civilize these kind of searches, because these are like quite controversial control measures. On the one hand, they are perceived to be necessary for order, for security, for all kinds of reasons that have to do with institutions or safety, even on streets or and so on and so forth. But also they're quite controversial because, especially when we talk about strip searching, when one is obliged to strip naked in front of the eyes of another person, of a stranger. This can be obviously quite intimidating. This can be quite impactful, but also exposing the naked body to another person or to other persons in plural also makes you quite vulnerable, of course, in these kind of circumstances. And what I would like to show is that that this is a controversial control measure, but also like a measure that is omnipresent, and that has become the object of a lot of discussion, a lot of debate, a lot of critique, a lot of normative efforts towards civilizing this control measure. I will then look at some failing regulatory efforts, just the case of Belgium. If I have some time, let's see. If I don't have enough time, I will skip the fourth part of my talk. And then I will say something towards the conclusion, some broader observations on body search. Now we can understand how we can think about body searches and what do body searches maybe also tell about ourselves and about societies we live in. So these are the three cases that I would like to discuss briefly, just to introduce the topic. There are many more cases. If you would look around on the internet, if you do a search in newspapers or whatever, you will find a lot of cases that are seen to be quite controversial in different parts of the world. The cases that I will discuss are three cases which go from what might be referred to as an exceptional case, the trial of the terrorist attacks in my country in 2016, which is affecting like a very small group of people that we might not empathize with at first sight. I will then move on to a larger group of people that are affected by body searches and controversy about body searches. A recent Supreme Court case in Norway, which was affecting prisoners in Norway. And the last case is bringing us really to the normal, to the mundane, to the free world, so to speak. It's like controversy around body searches at music festivals in Australia, New South Wales, a topic that has been at the top of debate in New South Wales. I learned for quite some years, and there, of course, kids, young people are being affected by these kind of searches. So that brings us really to our own life world, so to speak, or the life world of our kids, so to speak. So these are the three cases. So let's have a look just briefly to introduce the topic also. This is the first case, which refers to the trials, the terrorist trials, which took place at the end of 2022 in my country, in Belgium. These were the attacks of 22 March 2016. And some of you may know about these attacks. On that day, 32 people died in the airport of Zaventem, which is the national airport of Belgium. Also, people died in a metro station in Maalbeek, which is in Brussels, through bombs that exploded in some kind of terrorist attacks. And this was closely after the attacks in Paris. In November 2015. Think about Bataclan and all other events that were taking place in Paris. The trial started in 2022, in fall 2022. Extreme security measures were in place, including the searching of the defendants, and these were also quite intrusive. So these were like very frequent searches that took place, including squatting on a very frequent basis, also including the visual inspection of the intimate parts, the anus of these defendants. It led to a lot of controversy. They also they also took it to the court, and a judge in Brussels at the end of 2022 also argued that these searches were in violation of Article 3 of the European Court of Human Rights, the European Convention of Human Rights. A Court of Appeal in 2023 also confirmed this position. And if you look at the whole case, and I don't have time to go further into this, but you could also see that also prison monitoring board, the Conseil Central des Prisons, was looking into this case. They visited the prison where these persons were strip searched. The High Council of Justice was looking into this case. Also, the police inspection was looking into this case. So there was a lot of debate, a lot of discussion on the legality and the justification of these strip searches. But also public debate. There was a lot of public debate, also outrage about the fact that isn't it strange that these terrorists could problematize, could raise these kind of issues, given the gravity of what had passed. So there was also quite some public debate on this in terms of, didn't they deserve this? Didn't they deserve to be treated like this in social media, for example, in public discussions in Belgium? So that's the first case. So let's move on to the second one, which brings us to Norway, which is like a case of the Supreme Court of 22 March 2024, which was a case which dealt with a number of prisoners in the prison of Bergen prison in Norway. 3 prisoners that were serving long prison sentences and who were also subjected to a large number of body searches between 2018 and 2020, which included undressing, which included the performing of squatting, knee bends, and the routine conduct of these kind of strip searches. And also over here, the Supreme Court in Norway argued that there was like a violation of Article 3 of the European Convention of Human Rights. And for me, it's an interesting case also because shortly after the Supreme Court judgment, the CPT was also visiting Norway. So this happened last year, and I can say something about it because the report has been published in January 2025. And we could also see that this was indeed a topic of concern in Norway at that time. And then the third one is bringing us to the music festivals and the large-scale use of strip searches in New South Wales. And the article that you see on your screen is a very recent article. It's taken from The Guardian, 13 May 2025, so very recently, 2 weeks ago, where it was argued that 3,000 persons claimed to be affected by illegal police searches. And actually, if you would go through the database of The Guardian, then you could also find like that 1 week earlier, 1 week before this article was published in The Guardian, there was also like a testimony of a woman who was being strip searched at one of these music festivals, who claimed that this was like degrading, humiliating inspection, which also included like removing her tampon while being undressed in front of a police officer. So there was a lot of controversy, which actually, in fact, if you would look deeper into this case, it's a topic that has been going on for quite a number of years in New South Wales. For example, in 2019, in the summer of 2019, a report was published on strip searching and the use of police strip searches in New South Wales at these kind of music festivals. And there it was found that there was like a major increase in the number of strip searches at these kind of festivals, a 20-fold increase between 2006 and 2018. That was said in the report at that time. But also that a lot of these searches were triggered by what turned out to be quite minor cases, mostly drug use for personal consumption. So not in the the serious, the urgent circumstances that seem to be or that should be required to start with this kind of measure. Because if we talk about strip searches, and that's the type of body search that I'm focusing on mostly today, in normal circumstances, it would be a sex crime, and I think that's the case in most countries. If I would make another person strip naked under threat or at gunpoint or whatever, it would be a sex crime. So it's like a quite intense and quite provoking control measure within our societies. So what can we conclude? What can we conclude from those three cases? As I said, many more cases could be discussed. So omnipresent. Searches are widespread worldwide. I think they are like a routine part of our criminal justice systems in different societies. I could give many more examples. So for example, when I was talking about the Constitutional Court of Norway, also the Constitutional Courts of Germany, of Belgium, last week Denmark have looked into similar cases. The same with music festivals. Also in Belgium, this has become a major topic in the same period in 2019 in terms of search practices. And of course, stop and search is a topic that has been at the top of the agenda in the UK, for example, like stop and search practices, also involving children and so on and so forth, have been at the top of the agenda of a lot of debate and discussion. So it's omnipresent. It happens in different contexts, in numerous contexts, from the high-profile trial, the terrorist trial that I was discussing in the first case, up to the sites of entertainment, the music festivals that I was discussing in the third example. And it can affect a wide variety of people, from the high-profile suspect of a terrorist offense up to the young woman who attends a music festival and actually just wants to make fun and wants to dance on that occasion. So omnipresent would be the first conclusion, which is that I would like to make. Second one is contested, and I think that's quite obvious because at the same time as I was discussing the presence of these kind of searches, they're also contested. They felt to be degrading, they felt to be humiliating, they felt to be dehumanizing. There's a lot of critique, a lot of contestation, not only within the courts, but also within courts, within human rights bodies, and so on and so forth. And at the same time, there's always this idea that it is necessary, that it is justified, that we need to do this for order reasons, for security reasons, to see if there's drugs, if there's weapons, if there's phones, or other kinds of contraband that might be necessary to be detected by these kind of measures. Within a prison context, this also brings us, of course, to the question and the tension between dignity and security. And the quote on the slide is probably a quote that most people in the room today know about. It's Irving Goffman, who in his book Asylums, in the essay on total institutions, claimed that in these kind of institutions, in total institutions, there's like this constant conflict between human standards on the one hand and institutional efficiency on the other hand. A constant conflict is a very nice way of putting it, between, on the one hand, individual dignity, if you want to put it like that, the human standards, and institutional efficiency, the perspective of the institution, the perspective of order, the perspective of striking a balance between these kind of two competing, so to speak, aspects of living in these kind of closed institutions. And of course, this tension, because Goffman was not referring explicitly to searches, but this tension between dignity and security becomes most tangible, so to speak, when people are being subjected to strip searches, because that's the moment when individual bodies are exposed, are naked, or when there's like a pat down search, when bodies are being touched by strange hands. So it's quite an invasive, potentially degrading measure. But at the same time, the institutional efficiency always pops up, and that explains also why it is so common, so such a routine part of our systems, of our criminal justice systems, policing systems across the globe. I'm not going to dig further into this, because that would lead us too far. But here you see the book actually that we did. We had a workshop in 2022, and the book itself, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's not because I edited it or that I involved in the project, but it's really a nice group of authors that we will be able to bring together and to look at strip searches and body searches from different angles, from a human rights perspective, but also from a security perspective, from a criminology perspective, and from different countries. So if you're interested in this topic, please feel free to consult it or to get in touch with me if you would like to know more about this. But let me now turn to the third part of my talk, which is about civilizing body searches. Because if these kind of measures are seen to be problematic, and at the same time they are perceived to be necessary, how can we deal with them? What kind of rules do we need to apply when we decide to take this kind of control measure? And when we decide affirmatively, when we say, yes, we need to do this kind of body search, how does it have to be executed? In what ways can we do it in such a way that we avoid or that we minimize embarrassment, the humiliation? How can we make them, so to speak, acceptable, between brackets? And that's what civilizing, or the word civilizing, means in this context. It is how to make them acceptable, how to civilize them within the European context. And then you can see that within Europe, there's quite some attention for civilizing body searches within a European context, which means that from a European perspective, and I'm now talking about Council of Europe perspective and the institutions that you see over there, and I will look into them a bit more in detail in a second, are bodies from the Council of Europe, the Committee of Ministers, with the recommendations of the Committee of Ministers, the European Anti-Torture Committee, the CPT, and the European Court of Human Rights. All of these bodies suggest that body searches are necessary and that they can take place. So there's no prohibition to have body searches within that framework of the Council of Europe. But, and that's the but, of course, they are perceived as measures which are contested, which are potentially problematic, and which therefore need to be justified, both in terms of deciding to take this kind of decision. That's the justification of the search, which is like the first part. And the second part deals with the execution. If you have decided that a search is necessary, that are legitimate reasons to subject someone to that kind of measure, how do you then execute them in a way that would do the least harm, so to speak, to the person subjected to this kind of measures? I will just very briefly touch upon all four, but I will do it very briefly because it would lead us way too far to discuss it in too much detail. If you're interested in this topic, there's quite some information you can find, for example, on the website of the European Court of Human Rights, on the CPT, of course, European prison rules, of course, also. I've summarized some of these sources, so to speak, in the PowerPoint also. So when we talk about the European prison rules, It's an important recommendation within the Council of Europe. As some of you may know, it has been revised also several times, most recently in 2020. And it is rule number 54 that deals explicitly with searches and controls. And over here you see how in the European prison rules, it is, for example, argued, if you look at the slide on 54.4, prisons being searched shall not be humiliated by the searching process. Or the next one, they shall only be searched by staff of the same gender. Or that prison staff shall not execute internal physical searches. Internal physical searches, body cavity searches, they're sometimes referred to. That is something that usually only is being adopted by prison doctors, by medical professionals. The European prison rules. You can also see in the European Code of Ethics for prison staff, if you look at number 17 over there, prison staff shall carry out personal searches only when strictly necessary, referring to the necessity. There should be good reasons to do it. And in terms of the execution, the second part of the civilizing part, shall not humiliate prisoners in the process. The CPT also has drawn attention to body searches and to strip searches. For those of you who are not familiar with the CPT, it's a body established within the human rights framework of the Council of Europe. It's established by a convention of 1987, European Convention for the Prevention of Torture and Inhuman or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. And the CPT can visit places of detention all over Europe, which means at this moment, the member states of the Council of Europe, basically. Yeah? So we can visit places of detention in the Council of Europe, which is prisons, but also police cells, youth institutions, centers for migration, forensic psychiatry can also be visited in these contexts. And it should not come as a surprise, probably, that given the central objective, the mandate of the CPT, which is about preventing degrading treatment, inhuman treatment, or punishment, that also body searches have become a topic that CPT also looks into. And CPT is a bit different from other bodies in the sense that it's like a bottom-up system. So it works very much on the basis of observations. It works on the basis of findings on the floor, so to speak. Delegations of the committee can visit, for example, prisons or police cells. They can talk in private to people who are deprived of their liberty. They can also consult registers on the use of control measures, for example. And in that way, it's also quite an empirical institution, because in that way, it's about the findings that lead to observations, which are then written down in reports, and which also then can lead to recommendations which are addressed to the state that is being visited by the delegation of the CPT. And that means that all these recommendations are formulated by the CPT, for example, on the topic of body searches, also flow from these kind of visits and from the observations that are made at the occasion of these kind of visits, which means that you will often need to look into the reports themselves to find out what CPT has to say about this or other topics. Sometimes these kind of observations are brought together. So, for example, last year there was like a special section in the annual report which dealt with trans prisoners and how they're being dealt with in European prison systems. But that doesn't happen always. And so, for example, on the topic of body searches, there's no special section that deals with body searches in the work of the CPT so far. So that means that you need to look into how CPT looks at this at the occasion of different visits. So, for example, over here, you can see the observation that CPT made with respect to Portugal, visit of 2008, where it is said that strip searches should be based on an individual risk assessment, that they should be subject to rigorous criteria and supervision, and be carried out in a manner respectful of human dignity. And also, in addition, that prisoners should not be required to undress in the presence of custodial staff of the opposite sex, something that we also just saw, something similar in the European prison rules. Or the second one, for the Slovak Republic, prisoners should never be required to strip naked in front of other inmates or of a large group of persons. And it is totally unacceptable to have dogs in close proximity of prisoners who are in the process of being strip searched. It refers a bit to this vulnerability element also that I was referring to at the start of my presentation. Other examples, for example, the second one that you now see on the slide, the Kosovo visit of 2010. How can we minimize embarrassment when people have to be subjected to this kind of measure? For example, and that's like the standard recommendation that CPT now has, that you should not be required to remove all your clothes at the same time, but that you should be able to remove them in a so-called two-part process. People should be allowed to remove, as you can read also, clothing above the waist and redress before removing the further clothing. So a way to deal with this aspect of humiliation or potential degradation, and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but this just to show you how, from a European perspective, and from a preventive perspective, from an empirical perspective, also so to speak, this has become like an object of civilizing body searches. And then to conclude, but I'm not going to go into detail because that would lead us too far. The European Court of Human Rights, of course, has also addressed this topic in a number of important cases. And I already referred to this when I was talking about those three cases at the start of my presentation. For example, at the Supreme Court in Norway explicitly refers to the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. Also in the Belgian case, this happened. And on the slide, you see some of those key cases that have been focusing on strip searches within the case law of the European Court of Human Rights. Mostly it's then Article 3 of the European Convention that is at play. Sometimes also Article 8 on the private issue. So, for example, if you look at the two first cases, Palazinas and Iwanchuk, they deal with one single body search was seen to be in violation of Article 3. In the first case, which included Lithuania, it was a prisoner who was strip searched in the presence of a female prison officer and whose sexual organs were being touched and were being touched by prison officers who were not wearing gloves, for example. Or the second one in respect of Poland, also there it was like a one-off strip search that was being problematized because a prisoner in Poland had requested to vote in the parliamentary elections. But before he could go to vote, he needed to undress in front of prison officers who then would make fun of him, would make humiliating remarks about his body, and who abused him verbally. So he was ordered to strip naked. In the end, he refused to do that. So he was taken back to his cell and he could not go to vote, which was also a topic of concern of the European Court of Human Rights. So those are like one-off searches that have been problematized by the court. Some others deal with routine strip searches. For example, Lorset and others and Van der Ven versus the Netherlands, which deal with high security units in the Netherlands in 2003. Frérot versus France also deals with frequent routine strip searches, which also included like annual inspections of the body of this persons, and so on and so forth. I'm not going to go in too much detail because it would lead us too far. But I think the message is clear, that you see from a European perspective different efforts to civilize, so to speak, this control measure, which is seen like a very controversial control measure, a control measure which is seen to be necessary, indispensable, according to some, but which, of course, also raises a lot of questions, a lot of issues. As I said, and as I announced, I think this will lead us too far if I would deal now in depth with the Belgian case, because it's we have about 20 minutes left. So I think I will skip this part of my presentation. It's a pity because it's a very interesting case, actually, the Belgian case, because a lot of these principles have been in the law, in the prison law of 2005 in my own country, where a very clear distinction has been made between searching of the clothes, what in English is called a pat-down search, on the one hand, and searching the naked body, looking at the naked body, the strip search on the other hand. These kind of principles have been introduced in Belgium in the prison law of 2005, because it was also argued that these kind of searches, the strip searches, the search of an inmate's body, can only be executed on the basis of an individual risk assessment, and that an individual decision is necessary by the prison governor before this kind of decision can be made. So the rules are there, and the rules are quite clear. You can also see actually the further discussion of this in Parliament, in the House of Representatives in my country. But when it entered into force, this article, the prison administration made a further distinction between three different searches of an inmate's clothes. So you had the search of the inmate's body, what we call a strip search in English. And then you had the inmate's clothes, searching the inmate's clothes according to the law. But the prison administration made like a distinction between three different forms of searching an inmate's clothes: a summary, a thorough, and a full search. And the interesting thing is that the full search of the clothes implied that the inmate also needed to undress fully and needed to hand over his or her clothes to the prison officer, who then needed to verify if all the clothes were being handed over. But of course, if you need to undress, and if you need to hand over your clothes in order that the prison officer can check those clothes and verify if there's nothing in those clothes, then of course you also show yourself naked. And that's also what prisoners in Belgium were arguing. And in the end, they also got a lot of attention for that in the tribunal. I cannot go into detail in this case, but it's a very fascinating case. And actually, if you would be interested in reading about it, if you scan the QR code on the slide, you can just get access to the chapter that I wrote about that in the book Body Searches and Imprisonment that I was mentioning before. But let's move on, because the story is quite a long story, and it would lead us perhaps. Let's finish with some final observations, maybe, because so far I've been talking mostly about why our body search is perceived to be problematic. I've talked about the law. I've talked about human rights. I've talked about institutions, European institutions, taking an interest in this control measure. So we've talked about mostly about it from a law perspective, a legal perspective, a preventive monitoring perspective. But perhaps it's also possible to look at it from a more sociological perspective. And for this, I would like to draw a parallel, so to speak, with Durkheim on punishment. And this quote is probably very familiar to many of you who are present in this session, because for sociologists of punishment, it's a quite famous passage, I think, in one of the key books of Durkheim, where he argued that punishment is mostly about human emotions. It's mostly a passionate, even a mechanical reaction, but at the same time, it also fulfills an important function. And for Durkheim, of course, this had to do with the conscience collective aspects of solidarity, about cohesion within societies. The interesting thing about the quote is that Durkheim was referring on the one hand to the goals of punishment, correcting criminals or deterring potential offenders, but that the goals of punishment should never be confused with the function of punishment. And for him, as I just mentioned, this was mostly about preserving social cohesion. And in that way, Durkheim, of course, has been very important to help us think beyond the objectives of punishment, and even argued that punishment may often fail to deter or to rehabilitate, but that is maybe not that important to understand punishment. And if we really want to understand punishment, then we also need to look at what in the quote is said, the true function, so to speak, of punishment, to maintain intact social cohesion by maintaining all its vitality in the common conscience, the conscience collective. Maybe it's also possible to think about body searches beyond the objectives of body searches. Maybe we also need to move away from thinking about body searches exclusively as a means towards a certain end. And maybe we should also start to look and study it and understand it beyond the security-dignity divide that I was discussing earlier. So maybe the question should be, or should become, what are the deeper functions of body searches? What kind of role do they play in contemporary societies? And it's a reflection that I'm not finished. I haven't finished, but it's a question that really fascinates me actually at this stage in my thinking about body searches and how I perceive body searches. And one of the ways to think beyond body searches and instrumental reasons might be to look more closely on what body searches do, especially what they do in a world where the body is no longer a focus of punishment. So if we look at the histories, the history writing on punishment, one of the key themes has been the disappearance of the body when we talk about punishment, the abolition of death penalty in most countries across the globe, the abolition of flogging or corporal punishment. If you look at the work, for example, of Peter Spierenburg, who talked about and writes about the disappearance of the scaffold, the hanging and the flogging in medieval city centers. You think about the spectacle of suffering of Spierenburg, but also Michel Foucault's work. Foucault, Surveiller et Punir, the first chapter in that book dealt with the body of the condemned person, the destruction, so to speak, of the human body, which was exemplified by the destruction of the human body of Robert Amiens in 1757, which is described in full detail in the first chapter of his book, The Body of the Convict. Was then contrasted, as most of you also know, with the daily schedule at the youth institution, to make also this distinction between sovereign power and disciplinary power. Well, the question is maybe to what extent underneath the declared objectives of body searches also other objectives or other motives are at play. And maybe in a modern society where corporal punishment, where flogging, in theory, have been banned from the penal system, from the specter of that we can take, and where humiliation has become some kind of taboo, there may be these evoke memories of corporals to still look unashamedly at the naked body, at the protesting body, at the subjugated body that is being subjected to these kind of measures. Maybe it offers some kind of spectacle value in our nowadays societies. And the fact that many people on social media, for example, laughed away the complaints about body searches during the trials in Belgium. My first case that I discussed at the start of my presentation, and the opinion article that you see on the screen refers to this case. Maybe the fact that so many people laughed about this says something about an aspect of punishment that we too often neglect, that in essence, it is about degradation. It is about putting people in place. And perhaps the body search is exactly doing that, because it is one of the most intrusive measures and ways that are still perceived to be legitimate, that are in our law books about putting people into place. And in that sense, it says something about the intrinsic degradation that is part of punishment, that is part of control measures in our contemporary societies. And I need to conclude, and I see that I'm running well over time, so I'm sorry for this. So this is like the final slide. The Europeans wanted gold and slaves like everyone else, but at the same time they wanted statues put up to themselves as people who have done good things for the slave. Being intelligent and energetic, and at the peak of their powers, they could express both sides of their civilization, and they got both the slaves and the statues. It's a beautiful quote. Stan Cohen also uses it in one of his beautiful articles, and I also think often about this quote when thinking about punishment, when thinking about control in the European perspective, because we have this idea that Europe should be a shining example, should be at the forefront in terms of human rights and in terms of showing also to the world what it means to punish, to subject people to these kind of control measures in a dignified way on the one hand, but at the other hand, and that's also what becomes clear if you look deeper into this, it seems so difficult for us, and perhaps also in other parts of the world, to really get rid of the degrading elements in our European penal systems. And that's also what the title basically wanted to communicate. There is this ongoing struggle, so to speak, also within Europe, in the centers of Europe, with the key question, which is, in my view, and I still need to develop my thinking a bit further on this, but which is, in essence, I think, a question about degradation. I'm going to leave it over here, Richard. So I'm going to close, and I'm going to give the floor to you.
Well, thank you, Tom. It is indeed a fascinating and intricate topic.